10-6 always. That's for the culture.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bucks and Six podcast. We're on issue 4, volume 2 of They Got Next. This year we're looking at the Atlantic Division. Anyways, just hope y'all are doing good on this fine recording on a Thursday. Hope you guys are having a good week. And let's get right into it. This issue's take of the day is Fred VanVleet will solidify himself as the guard of the Raptors. I'm not gonna lie, when Fred VanVleet torched the Warriors, I was a little sad, but I think with Fred VanVleet coming into this season, the Raptors being back at home, and overall just not having to deal with the fact that they never really had any quote-unquote home games, I think Fred VanVleet is poised for a great season. If everything were to go correctly, the stars align and all that shit, I think Fred VanVleet's season would look something like definitely an all-star, 20 plus points per game, potential MIP, and overall just sort of showing that he could be the next Kyle Lowry, even though I think Kyle Lowry is an extremely unique player that I don't know if we'll see anytime soon, someone that's even on that same level. However, I think with now how the roster's looking, he's in a position where he's the vet / big bro. He's coming off a career high defensive rating, coming off a 54-piece career high. And overall, I think Toronto is a big wild card for the season. As I said earlier, last year was a wash because they never really had any home games, Playing in a state that's not even where your fans are from is a situation that only they really had to deal with. I think coming back home and knowing how passionate Toronto Raptors fans are, either way, lock that in. Fred VanVleet will solidify himself as the guard for the Toronto Raptors. I give that a
guarantee.
Alright, anyways, let's get into the meat of this podcast, shall we? As I said earlier, this week we got the Atlantic Division. Overall, I would say this division is the most stacked. You can make a case that all of these teams could make the playoffs. If that were to happen, it would be the first time since the 2014-15 season where the Southeast Division, everybody went. That'd be teams like Houston, Memphis, San Antonio, Dallas, and New Orleans. Anyways, if you weren't here last week, go back and listen first of all. Not kidding, but as we go through every team this year, with the season coming ever closer, we're going to go through each team, dictate, what's their core looking like, who's going to pop off, who's going to really take that next step, as well as who's going to slump, who's going to start to show signs of regression, or overall maybe even fall off the face of the earth. I don't know. That's hard to judge. And last but not least, who's a player that could potentially be on the trading block? Who's a player that could potentially be moved for some assets that'll either help you in the future or right now. Speaking of a team that would only really make trades for right now, we have the Brooklyn Nets, the unfortunate favorites to win the NBA championship this year. As it stands right now, their core is pretty obvious. KD, Harden, and Kyrie, 3 generational players, 3 first ballot Hall of Famers, and just 3 guys that I think, if all healthy, can create the most potent and effective offense the NBA has ever seen. That's pretty self-explanatory. Player I think is going to pop off, I picked Bruce Brown. He's coming off a solid playoff run, and he has the ability to guard 1 through 5, which I think is crazy. Only thing I'd say about Bruce Brown is he's got to learn to give up the rock. One of the main reasons that Milwaukee won against him was that one game. I don't remember which one it was, but Bruce Brown decided, I'm that guy, pal, and decided to take the last shot instead of swinging it to actually not even arguably, flat out, the greatest scorer to ever play the game, Kevin Durant. Aside from that, I also picked Blake Griffin. I think with Blake Griffin, he's going to be able to have a full season with Brooklyn, and with that, he'll be able to establish an actual rhythm. Because if you look at it, he only played 26 games with Brooklyn, and I think he's going to be able to slide right into that starting 5 role. He'll be able to play some decent defense, as well as his ability to stretch the floor now will be really effective for the Brooklyn Nets. In terms of who's going to slump, I picked LaMarcus Aldridge here. I think, with health concerns with his heart especially, I think whenever any player takes time away because of heart conditions, that's something that I think needs to be monitored very closely with how strenuous basketball can be. Overall, I think he's still going to be solid. I think even if he is 100%, ready to go, everything's good to go, I think Griffin will still be the starter there. LaMarcus Aldridge ain't no slump either. Mid-range mid-range killer. All right, person I think is going to get traded is Nicholas Claxton. I think even despite the fact that he has a lot of potential, there's really no space on that roster for him to get, I think, a significant amount of run, just because all those guys are literally in championship or bust mode. Everybody there, for the most part, is on like 1-year contracts, stuff of that nature. And with that, I think Nicholas Claxton being a young player just doesn't fit that timeline. So I believe if I were him, I would want to go to a different destination. However, I also understand if he wants to stay and collect his ring. No shame in that. Either way, Nicholas Claxton, again, is a guy that has a lot of potential. He can guard multiple positions, and I think any big man who can switch on to smaller players is always a plus. With the package, however, I think it'd be another vet, just, another guy who's not necessarily in the twilight of his career, but maybe past his prime, but is still very serviceable. A player that comes to mind, but I don't think would definitely not be traded, would be Andre Iguodala, something of that nature. I think they'd either trade for someone like that or picks and cash considerations potentially. The Brooklyn Nets, if healthy, looking very scary. Up next, we got just across the river, I think. I don't know. I'm not from New York. I'm fucking Canadian. But we got the New York Knicks. As it stands right now, I would consider their core to be Julius Randle, Kemba Walker, the Canadian man himself, RJ Barrett, and I'd even throw Emmanuel Quickley in there. The main reason I'm throwing in Emmanuel Quickley is because I'm picking him to pop off. I think he's another guy I could potentially see winning Sixth Man of the Year, or at least being in that conversation. Very shifty and creative with the ball, and overall I would call him the steal of the 2020 draft. So aside from Emmanuel Quickley, I've also got Kemba Walker to pop off this year. I think that's all stemming from the fact that the boy is coming home. Sorry. I think this will be a good fresh start for Kemba. He's coming to a team that has a lot of veteran presence and is not necessarily headed by a super young nucleus. And I just think the addition of Kemba makes it so that Julius Randle isn't necessarily alone out there. Now, for the players I picked to slump here, I'm using the word very lightly, but I slotted here Julius Randle and Evan Fournier. Now, before you click off, let me just explain myself. With Julius Randle, he's going to be in a situation where he's not the only massive threat out there. He's got Kemba, still has RJ Barrett, who really took a step up from last year. The additions of Evan Fournier, and who knows, maybe even Mitchell Robinson can pop off as well. But with the addition of all these players, Julius Randle won't have as many shots as he would, and I think that's the same thing with Evan Fournier, and we've already seen what happens when he comes to a team that has star players / primary options. He went from averaging almost 20 points on the Magic to averaging about 13 on the Celtics. And the player I think is going to get traded is Kevin Knox. The package I would expect would either be another veteran wing or just a second round draft pick maybe, just so that you can get some value out of him before, because he's obviously not going to get another contract for the Knicks, I would think, but who knows? Crazier things have happened. All right, after the New York Knicks, we got another NBA team that has a long history within the league. Got the Boston Celtics. As they're on the quest for banner number 18, their core as it stands right now, I would consider to be Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, and I'd even throw Robert Williams III in there. The player I picked to pop off, I'm going to do my bias pick first. I put Peyton Pritchard here. I think he's building off of a overall solid summer. 91 points in a Pro AM game. Might not be against NBA competition, but still very impressive. Overall, I think he needs to run it back against Davion Mitchell because he got absolutely fucking clammed. I think with Peyton Pritchard, he's a bucket off the bench, and if there are any games where they're resting Jason Tatum or multiple starters, I'd say he's got the green light. I think he's a guy that can really be a bucket getter, and I think just contribute to the Celtics winning culture and potentially be a part of a championship team. Who knows? A player that I think is more likely to pop off, though, is Robert Williams III. Just signed a nice, juicy contract, 4 years, $48 million. However, I can see him outplaying this contract and being a massive steal. $12 million obviously is a lot of money, but in the scheme of the NBA, that can really be a contract that's like, whew, we got this guy on a nice bargain kind of thing. Him as a player, he does all the gritty stuff that you need players to do, and he basically averaged like 2 blocks a game, which was real nice, especially considering he's pretty small for the center at 6'8". The player I think is going to slump, Al Horford, 35 years old. He's not getting any younger. I think he'll still be serviceable, and when I use the word slump, I'm particularly meaning statistically. Al Horford has the chance to be a very poor man's Draymond Green kind of player. He'll be able to, not necessarily play make, but just be that veteran presence that's there to keep everyone in check kind of thing, just since, your star players, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, are still relatively young. Person I think is going to get traded, I put Romeo Langford here. I think he's a guy with a lot of potential. However, I just don't think there's enough room for him, especially in the guard rotation, to get any significant runs. If he were to be traded, Brad Stevens would be on his Danny Ainge type beat, and I think he would just trade him off for picks. And after the Celtics, we got, let's see here, Canada's very own, the Toronto Raptors. They have a pretty big core. I'd consider it to be Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam. I'd even throw Gary Trent Jr. in there. Obviously, you got OG Anunoby, one of, if not the best 3-and-D wings in the league. Malachi Flynn, I think, will really come into his own this season, as well as you got 4th overall pick Scotty Barnes. Now, the players I picked to pop off here, I put Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. If you were, for some reason, you're here at this part of the episode and you haven't been at the start. But I think Fred VanVleet is poised for a really good season this year. Potential all-star, maybe. Who knows? I just think he's another one of those guards that can really step up for Toronto and be a leader and potentially, who knows, maybe bring them back to the promised land of the playoffs. Maybe in the finals. Who knows? Up next, I got Gary Trent Jr. I was really high on Gary Trent Jr. when he was on Portland. That's the team I cheer for in the West. I think he's one of the next major second-round steals. He has potential to be a premium 3-and-D guard, and I still think Toronto absolutely fleeced Portland. Gary Trent Jr. is taller. I think I'd be more comfortable with him at the 3, even though I'm still kind of iffy on that, than having 6'3", on a good day, 6'2", 6'4", I don't know, Norman Powell as my 3. I think Toronto overall is very poised and very prepped to be successful in the next few years. Person I'm going to pick to slump, Pascal Siakam. I know statistics don't really say that, but he's coming off an injury, an injury where he's missing major time, and I think just trying to get into the rhythm and flow of things, especially if Toronto's firing on all cylinders beforehand, could be slightly difficult for Pascal, but he's an all-star, former All-NBA player. I think he could figure it out, but I just think he will have some slight learning curves and have a slightly slumpy year. Player I think is going to get traded, Goran Dragic. I think despite seeing him and Scotty Barnes live with him, he's already kind of slandered the Raptors. I'm sure he's somewhat, smooth things over considering he looked pretty friendly in the live video, but I think he could contribute to a team that's either contending or fighting for a playoff spot. However, with the Raptors, I would say that he's better off being traded just so you can allow guys like Malachi Flynn to really get some good runs and be able to give as much as they can to the team rather than being relegated to the bench. The package I would expect would potentially be a young player, just another guy that fits the timeline of this, not necessarily a rebuild, but this retooling of the Toronto Raptors. I think Goran Dragic, out of anyone on this list so far, is another potential buyout candidate. He's got a $19 million contract, so that might be a little hard to move. But Goran Dragic just seems like the kind of guy who cares more about winning, so I think he would potentially take that pay cut to become a free agent and sign to wherever he wants to. Last but not least, we got the team where their future seems the most uncertain right now with all the things going around in their organization, but I've got the Philadelphia 76ers. Their core is going to be people who are currently on the roster, so obviously that's people like Joel, Ben Simmons, and Tobias Harris. Players I'm picking to pop off are Tyrese Maxey and Shake Milton. These are two young guys that are going to be looked at more regardless of who Simmons is traded for. Maxey, I think, could lead the second unit, and Shake could be a primary bucket off the bench as well. Or potentially, maybe let Seth Curry run the 1 and Shake be the 2. Who knows? I don't even know who they're going to trade for. That's just if they get like another wing. Regardless, I think those two guys are young guys that could really bring a spark and fire off the bench for the 76ers. The player I'm picking to slump, Andre Drummond. He's going to come off the bench for the first time in his career since his rookie year. If they were to try to start him and Embiid, that would be dumb as fuck because that'd just be way too slow. I would just run a really small lineup and just completely thrash them in the transition game, just being faster and all. I think Andre Drummond is still obviously a prime rebounder in the league, and I think he still has opportunity to contribute to potentially winning team. Obviously, the trade piece here is pretty obvious. Ben Simmons. The fact that Ben is giving a list, though, is completely laughable. What the fuck have you done? Have they even made the? No, they haven't. I think they haven't even gone past the second round. Either way, Ben Simmons, I think, is still a promising young player. The package, though, I would look to get back a borderline all-star player plus another role player and picks. I think the Minnesota package was the best one I've seen. I think it was D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, and some picks. I would take that. Also heard that D'Lo's not really on the table anymore, but who knows? Philly needs to realize that they're not going to get back a potentially generational player that I think Ben can potentially be just with his size and athleticism. I think they need to cut their losses and I think look to get more depth rather than, another primary scorer slash just a primary piece in general. They're a team that I think consider themselves to be contenders, but as it is right now, that's kind of up in the air, all depending on who Ben gets traded for. CJ McCollum is my call, but, who knows? That's going to end it for this week. Thank you for tuning in to another Bucks and Six podcast. Next week, we're going to look at the Southeast Division, so that's Atlanta, Miami, Washington, Charlotte, and Orlando. I'm excited to get into those teams. Those are all teams that, especially the first and last few, are all very young and I think have a very bright future ahead of them. Either way, stay blessed, have a good day. Remember, there aren't a lot of guarantees in life, but the one thing you can bank on, it's Bucks and Six always. Have a good one.
Yeah, Bucks and Six always. That's for the culture.